July 1974. Most Americans were watching Watergate consume the presidency. Nixon had 30 days left in office. The country felt like it was coming apart. But in the background, something quieter was happening. Something that would shape the next 50 years of global finance. A man named William Simon boarded a plane. No press, no ceremony. He was America's newly appointed Treasury Secretary, and he was flying to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. His mission was not diplomatic in any conventional sense. It was structural. The dollar's credibility was fracturing, and Simon had been sent to build something new before it broke completely. To understand what he was trying to fix, go back 3 years. August 15th, 1971. Nixon appeared on national television and made an announcement that shook every central bank on Earth. The United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The Bretton Woods system, the post-war financial architecture that had governed global trade for a quarter century, was finished. For 25 years, foreign governments had held dollars because those dollars could be converted into gold at a fixed rate. That convertibility was the foundation of trust, and Nixon had just removed it. What followed was a credibility crisis, not an instant collapse, but a slow, corrosive loss of confidence. Inflation inside the United States climbed into double digits. The dollar depreciated against European currencies. Foreign governments holding billions in dollar reserves began asking an uncomfortable question. What exactly is this worth now? The answer the market kept providing was less than yesterday. The dollar remained the world's dominant reserve currency. There was no credible alternative, but its position was weakening. And Washington understood that without a new source of global demand for dollars, the erosion would continue. Simon arrived in Jeddah with an offer. It was not written as a formal treaty. It would not be voted on by Congress. It was an arrangement, structured and deliberate, between two governments who each needed something the other could provide. The United States would guarantee Saudi Arabia's security, advanced weapons, military presence, a protective umbrella over one of the most volatile regions on the planet. In return, Saudi Arabia would do two things. They would continue pricing their oil exclusively in US dollars. And they would take the surplus dollars accumulating from oil revenues and channel them back into US Treasury bonds. The operational details were handled by Simon and his deputy Jerry Parsky, who negotiated a specific and remarkable concession. Saudi Arabia's treasury purchases would be exempted from the standard reporting system that tracked all other foreign sovereign holdings. The Treasury International Capital System, which required disclosure of what foreign governments were buying in US debt markets, would not apply to the Saudis. The arrangement's existence was not hidden. The financial mechanics were. That distinction matters. This was not a covert conspiracy. It was deliberate opacity, structured by men who understood that scrutiny would complicate what they were building. What they built was a mechanism for synthetic dollar demand. Since every nation needed oil to run its economy, and Saudi Arabia would only accept dollars for that oil, every nation needed to hold dollars. Not because they were required to by any law, not because there was literally no alternative, but because the switching costs were prohibitive. The infrastructure of global trade, shipping contracts, commodity pricing, letters of credit, all of it was already denominated in dollars. Abandoning that system would cost more than accepting it. That calculation locked nations into dollar dependency more effectively than any formal agreement could have. Now here is what is important to understand about what happened next. Oil did not replace gold in any formal or legal sense, The dollar was not backed by oil the way it had once been backed by gold under Bretton Woods. Gold had imposed a hard constraint. It limited how many dollars America could print. Oil imposed no such constraint. What oil created was transaction demand, a structural, recurring reason for governments and institutions around the world to accumulate and hold dollars. The dollar did not gain a new anchor. It gained a new gravity, and that is a different thing, and in some ways, a more powerful one. The petrodollar recycling loop reinforced everything that followed. Saudi oil revenues flowed into dollar assets, especially US Treasuries. Those purchases helped keep American borrowing costs low. That allowed Washington to run persistent deficits that would have been unsustainable for any other nation. But this was only part of the architecture. The dollar's dominance also rested on the unmatched depth and liquidity of US financial markets. On the offshore euro-dollar system, trillions of dollars held and traded outside US jurisdiction, which created its own self-reinforcing demand. On the fact that global trade was invoiced in dollars, regardless of whether America was one of the parties. The petrodollar recycling also had consequences the architects did not advertise. The surplus dollars flowing through New York and London money center banks did not sit still. They were lent out, aggressively, to developing nations, hungry for capital. By the late 1970s, the recycled petrodollar had become the raw material of a global lending boom. By the early 1980s, that boom had become the Latin American debt crisis. Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, unable to service dollar-denominated debt as US interest rates spiked. The system Simon built in 1974 was not just a monetary mechanism. It was the origin point of a financial chain that stretched decades and continents. And then there is Paul Volcker. In 1979, inflation in America was approaching 14%. The Federal Reserve, under its new chairman, responded with one of the most brutal monetary interventions in American history. Interest rates were raised above 20%. The economy was deliberately crushed into recession. Unemployment spiked. Businesses failed. It was extraordinarily painful. And it worked. Inflation broke. The dollar's credibility, genuinely shattered after 1971, was restored not by the 1974 arrangement alone, but by Volcker's willingness to impose enormous domestic costs to defend the currency's integrity. Simon bought time. Volcker closed the wound. This is the pattern that runs through monetary history. When an empire's hard backing erodes, it finds other mechanisms to enforce demand for its currency. The Romans debased their coinage and then demanded taxes in that same coinage. The British enforced sterling through colonial trade monopolies. The Americans used military guarantees, commodity pricing conventions, and the unmatched scale of their capital markets. The tools change. The logic does not. Monetary power is not just about what your currency is worth. It is about how many people have no practical choice but to use it. For 5 decades, that logic held. The system was not static. There were oil shocks, debt crises, currency wars, and financial panics. The dollar's share of global reserves declined from its post-war peak as the world diversified. But the fundamental architecture, oil priced in dollars, dollar surpluses recycled into US assets, global trade invoiced in the American currency, remained largely intact. Until the signals started changing. Not a single dramatic break. Something slower, and in some ways more serious because of it. Russia's exclusion from the SWIFT system after 2022 accelerated a process already underway. Moscow and Beijing began settling energy trades in rubles and yuan. India started buying Russian oil in rupees. Saudi Arabia, publicly and with no great urgency, began discussing its willingness to accept yuan for Chinese oil purchases. BRICS nations began formal conversations about reducing dollar dependency and bilateral trade. These are not isolated gestures. They are a coordinated, if still fragmented, effort to reduce the friction cost of using non-dollar systems. And every time that friction cost falls, the dollar's structural advantage narrows. The yuan is not replacing the dollar. That needs to be said clearly. China's capital controls, the shallow depth of its sovereign bond market, and the absence of the legal protections that make US assets trusted by foreign holders, all of these make the yuan a poor candidate for global reserve status in any near-term scenario. BRICS has discussed alternatives for years and produced no functional mechanism. The dollar's share of global reserves, while declining, remains above 58%. No rival system currently matches the depth, liquidity, or institutional trust of US financial markets. But that is not the right question. The right question is not whether the dollar will be replaced. It is whether the conditions that made the dollar indispensable are beginning to weaken at the margins. Whether the network of dependencies that Simon and his contemporaries built is starting to fray. The dollar's share of global trade invoicing is declining faster than its reserve share. Commodity markets are beginning to fragment. The assumption that every nation will always price, trade, and save in dollars is being tested in ways it was not tested a decade ago. If that trend continues, the consequences are not necessarily dramatic or sudden. They are more likely structural and gradual. The United States could lose what the French economist Valéry Giscard d'Estaing once called the exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow cheaply in its own currency, run deficits no other nation could sustain, and export a portion of its inflation to the rest of the world. As foreign demand for US debt weakens even modestly, American borrowing costs rise. The fiscal space that reserve currency status provided begins to close. The adjustment would not look like a crash. It would look like a slow tightening, a ceiling appearing where there was once open sky. William Simon returned from Jeddah in the summer of 1974 with the framework of something remarkable. Not a secret treaty, not a conspiracy. A carefully structured arrangement that gave the dollar a new source of global relevance at the moment its old one had been destroyed. Most people alive today have never heard his name. They do not know about the reporting exemption. They do not know about Jerry Parsky or the Joint Commission. They have never thought about why the dollar retained its dominance after the gold window closed. They simply assumed it was natural, inevitable. The arrangement Simon built was designed to make it feel exactly that way. That feeling is still mostly intact, but the architecture underneath it is older now. The world that made it logical, a single dominant oil supplier, a US with uncontested military reach, no viable alternative to American financial markets, is not the world of 2025. The system has not failed, but it is no longer automatic. And the men who built it always understood that monetary systems do not collapse dramatically. They erode quietly at the edges until one day the center no longer holds the way everyone assumed it would. That moment has not arrived, but for the first time in 50 years, it is no longer unthinkable.